My name is Alex, and if you're watching this, you're part of the Decay Nation, the loyal subscribers to my channel, Urban Decay. For the past 5 years, I've chased ghosts across America. Not the spooky, spectral kind that rattle chains. I chase the ghosts of industry, of ambition, of lives left behind in the rust. Today's ghost was the king of them all, a true titan sleeping on the edge of a forgotten Pennsylvania town, the Bethlehem Steel Mill. From miles away it dominated the skyline, a jagged crown of smokestacks and blast furnaces piercing the gray, overcast sky. It wasn't just an abandoned building, it was a dead city, and I was here to read its eulogy. "All right, Decay Nation," I began, my voice a little too loud in the profound silence after I'd slipped through a gap in the perimeter fence. I panned my camera across the sprawling complex. "We are officially on holy ground. The locals here, they have stories." I chuckled, adjusting the strap of my heavy backpack. "They talk about a sound, a hum, that they call the Siren song. Legend says if you hear it for too long, the factory calls you in, and you become just another piece of its ghost story." I tapped the side of my head for the camera. "Personally, I think it's a load of crap. Probably just the wind playing the world's biggest, rustiest pipe organ. But hey, it makes for a great story, right? Entering the main foundry was like stepping into the ribcage of a colossal dead beast. The sheer scale of the place was humbling, designed for giants and machines, not for a single, soft-bodied human. Light struggled to pierce the grime-caked windows high above, sending down dusty cathedral-like shafts of light that illuminated floating particles and cast impossibly long shadows. The air was thick and cold, heavy with the smell of a century of decay, the sharp tang of rust, the thick, greasy scent of old oil, and the underlying odor of stagnant, mineral-rich water that had pooled in the low spots. The silence was the most overwhelming part. It was a deep, pressing quiet, so absolute that the crunch of my own boots on the debris-strewn floor sounded like gunshots. For the first hour, I was in heaven. I documented everything: the massive hooks hanging from chains like gallows, the control panels with their dead gauges and silent switches, the graffiti left by generations of explorers who had come before me. I was narrating, cracking jokes, explaining the steel-making process to my audience. It was a standard exploration. Then, I began to feel something. Not a sound, not yet. It was a vibration, a low-frequency thrum that traveled up through the thick soles of my boots and resonated deep in my bones. I stopped, planting my feet firmly on the concrete floor. It was real, a faint subaudible pulse, like the building had a slow mechanical heartbeat. I dismissed it as some nearby rail line or distant highway noise. I kept moving, venturing deeper, towards the central processing building, where the real guts of the operation were. That's when the feeling in my feet became a sound in my ears. It was faint, hiding just at the edge of my hearing, a single, unwavering bass note. I stopped again, killing the light on my camera and holding my breath. The wind sighed through a broken window high above, a mournful, chaotic sound. But beneath it, steady and pure, was the hum. "Okay," I whispered. My voice hushed, the bravado gone, replaced by genuine intrigue. I turned the camera on, my own face, my eyes wide. I think I'm hearing it. The famous Siren song. A thrill, cold and sharp, ran down my spine. This wasn't just a story. There was something here. Let's see where it leads. From that moment on, the exploration changed. I was no longer just wandering. I was being led. The hum was my guide, a constant resonant thread pulling me deeper into the factory's maze. The strange thing was, the sound wasn't scary. It was beautiful. It was a pure, perfect note that seemed to harmonize with the very structure of the building. And as I walked, I felt it resonating inside my skull. It was calming, hypnotic even. It made the immense decaying space feel less like a tomb and more like a temple. That's when I found the first offering. On a rusted catwalk, someone had arranged a perfect triangle of massive chrome ball bearings, polished to a mirror shine in defiance of the decay surrounding them. It was weird, almost artistic. "Looks like we're not the first artists in here," I joked to the camera, though the sight left a strange feeling in my gut. A few hundred yards further on, I found another. A perfect spiral of rusted bolts laid out on the floor, starting with the largest and spiraling down to the smallest. This wasn't random. This was deliberate. This was worship. My unease began to curdle into genuine fear when I found the blood. Beside a pile of sharp, twisted scrap metal, a dark reddish-brown stain was splashed across the concrete. It was old, but it was unmistakably blood. My boots crunched on something and I looked down. A human tooth, yellowed and cracked, lay in the rust-colored dust. The beautiful hum suddenly felt sinister. The welcoming vibe of the factory evaporated, replaced by the chilling sensation of being inside a predator's mouth. The hum was undeniably loudest near a heavy reinforced steel door with the words "Foreman's Office" stenciled in faded white paint. It was held shut by a thick, heavy-duty chain and a padlock so old it was practically fused with rust. This was the source, the heart of the song. My journalistic curiosity and a new morbid need to understand what happened here overrode my survival instincts. I unslung my backpack, pulled out my bolt cutters, and with a loud final snap, the lock broke and fell to the floor. The door groaned, open on protesting hinges, releasing a gust of stale, trapped air. The office was a time capsule. A thick blanket of gray dust covered everything. A desk, a rotary phone, a coat rack with a single moldering jacket still hanging on it. The hum was a physical presence in here, a low, intense vibration that made my teeth ache and the dust on the desk tremble. On that desk, coated in the gray film of years, sat a stack of leather-bound journals. With a trembling hand, I picked up the topmost one and opened it. The ink was faded, the handwriting precise. The early entries were mundane: production quotas, equipment malfunctions, complaints about the constant noise of the factory. But as I flipped through the years, the tone began to change. The foreman, a man named Elias Thorne, started writing about the noise differently. He stopped calling it noise. He started calling it the resonance, then the song. He wrote about hearing it in his sleep. He wrote about how his wife said he hummed the single low note constantly, even at the dinner table. He began to see it not as a nuisance, but as a consciousness, a voice. "The song is lonely," one entry read. "It is a god trapped in a cage of steel, and it is singing for its children." The later entries were filled with mad, ecstatic ramblings about the weakness of flesh, the pathetic frailty of the human body. He wrote about his first offering, a shard of metal he'd hammered into his own thigh to feel the song better. I grabbed the last journal, my heart pounding in my ears, almost as loud as the hum itself. The handwriting was a chaotic, barely legible scrawl. It was a testament to a mind completely shattered and rebuilt by the sound. I flipped to the final page, to the last words he ever wrote. "It's not in the air. It's in the metal. The song wants a new voice. It needs a choir. It wants flesh and steel to sing together." I read the words, and as the final syllable registered, in my brain, the hum in the room spiked with impossible speed. It wasn't a sound anymore. It was a physical blow, an invisible pressure that buckled my knees and forced the air from my lungs. The vibration wasn't just in my chest or my teeth. It was inside my skull, inside my very consciousness. It was a silent, deafening scream that wasn't a sound at all, but a command, an instruction, an injection of pure alien thought. It ripped through the barriers of my mind, and in that single horrifying moment of violation, it delivered a message of terrible clarity. It was telling me that the foreman was wrong. The song didn't just want a choir, it had found its lead singer. And I was home. The psychic blast of the hum left me on my knees in the dusty foreman's office, gasping for air as if I'd been submerged in deep water. The sound was gone, replaced by a profound, ringing silence in my ears. But the message remained. It was branded onto my consciousness, a core truth that had erased everything I was before. I was not an explorer. I was not a YouTuber. I was a vessel. I was chosen. The terror of that violation was so absolute it was almost serene. I knelt there for what felt like an eternity, the dust motes dancing in the single beam of light from the doorway, my mind a quiet, empty chamber that was now waiting to be filled. Slowly, shakily, I got to my feet. The journals were still on the desk. They were no longer historical artifacts. They were scriptures. I gathered them, stuffing them into my backpack with a reverence I didn't understand. A small, rational part of my brain, a tiny, screaming voice, from a life I no longer recognized, took over for a moment. Run. The command was primal. I turned and bolted from the office, my boots echoing in the vast empty halls. Get out. Get to the car. Drive away and never look back. I ran, fueled by a pure animal terror. But I didn't get far. With every 100 feet I put between myself and that office, the beautiful, resonant silence in my mind began to fray at the edges. It started as a low buzz, an irritation, like a fly trapped in my ear. Then, the buzz sharpened into a painful whine. Within moments, the whine became a full-blown, psychic screech, a sound like shards of glass grinding behind my eyeballs. The world dissolved into a cacophony of pain. The beautiful architecture of rust and decay around me twisted into a menacing cage. It felt like every bolt and girder in the factory was screaming at me in unison, a chorus of agonizing disapproval for my betrayal. I collapsed onto the concrete, dropping my camera, my hands clamped over my ears as if that could stop a sound that was coming from the inside out. The pain was a physical thing, a fire that threatened to burn my sanity to ash. There was only one cure. I knew it instinctively. I had to go back. Crawling at first, then stumbling, then running, I retreated, with every step back towards the foreman's office. The agonizing screech subsided, replaced once more by the calm, welcoming resonance. By the time I was standing at the office doorway again, the pain was gone, and only the beautiful, silent song remained. It was rewarding my obedience. I leaned against the doorframe, panting, tears of relief and despair streaming down my face. I was a dog on a leash, and the chain was made of sound. I was a prisoner. Okay. I picked up my camera, my hands trembling so hard I could barely hold it steady. I turned the lens on myself. The face that stared back from the small screen was a hollow-eyed stranger. "It won't let me leave," I whispered, the words ragged. The sound, it's like a wall of pain. I'm trapped here. I sank to the floor, my back against the wall, and I began to read the journals, not as a researcher, but as a fellow inmate looking for answers from the one who came before me. Elias Thorne's words were no longer the ravings of a madman. They were a guide. He wrote about the pain of leaving, calling it the dissonance of disconnection. He described the hum as a living entity, an artist that saw the human body as an unfinished sculpture. "Flesh is a dull instrument," one entry read. "It cannot hold the true resonance. To hear the song properly, one must have an anchor. The body must be tuned." He wrote about his first integration with a chilling clarity. The pain is the friction between the old self and the new. Blood is the lubricant of transformation. It baptizes the steel, making it part of the body's holy machinery. Hours bled into one another. I wandered the factory floor again, but my perspective had changed. I was no longer seeing ruins. I was seeing a cathedral of raw materials. I saw beauty in the jagged edges of torn sheet metal, elegance in the coiled springs of a broken machine, purpose in the sharp teeth of a discarded gear. The rational part of my brain was screaming, begging me to fight, but its voice was now a faint whisper, easily drowned out by the constant beautiful song in my head. The song was showing me things. It was teaching me. It was telling me I was weak, soft, and temporary, and it was showing me how to fix myself. I found myself back at my camera, setting it up on a crate. I felt a strange compulsion to document the process, just as Thorne had in his journals. This was important. This was history. He wasn't crazy, I said to the lens, my voice unnervingly calm. My eyes were wide, glowing with a feverish light. I held up a piece of rusted metal, a small, perfectly formed gear no bigger than my thumb. Thorne, he was a pioneer, a visionary. He understood that we are incomplete. I ran my thumb over the gear's sharp teeth. This place, it doesn't want to hurt us. It wants to make us better, stronger, permanent. I smiled, a genuine, blissful smile that felt utterly alien on my own face. It's time for my acclimatization. It's time to tune the instrument. My workshop was a grimy, oil-stained workbench. My tools were the gear, and a shard of sharpened steel I had selected with the care of a master craftsman. The song in my head swelled, a triumphant, euphoric symphony. It was time. This was what it wanted. This was what I wanted. There was no hesitation now, no fear, only a profound sense of purpose. I laid my left hand flat on the workbench, palm down. I looked at the soft, unblemished skin over my knuckles, and for the first time in my life, I felt a deep, abiding disgust for it. It was weak. It was flesh. It had to be improved. I picked up the sharp metal shard. The song vibrated through my entire body, a wave of ecstatic encouragement. I positioned the tip of the shard over the back of my hand. I took a deep, steadying breath, and then I pressed down. The initial pain was blinding, a white-hot flash that made my vision swim. A thick, dark line of red welled up as I dragged the shard across my skin. But just as a scream began to build in my throat, the hum in my head enveloped the pain, transforming it, transmuting it into a wave of unimaginable pleasure. It was a reward. It was the song's approval. With a choked sob that was equal parts agony and ecstasy, I pried the wound open. The sight of my own blood, of my own flesh parting, was grotesquely beautiful. I picked up the rusted gear. It was cold and heavy. Then, slowly, deliberately, I pressed it into the wound, forcing it down past the layers of skin and tissue, until it grated against the bone beneath. The pain was immense, but the pleasure was divine. I collapsed against the workbench, panting, my world shrinking to the single, throbbing point of agony and bliss in my hand. The gear was inside me now, an anchor, a part of the factory, a part of the song, living inside my own flesh. The commanding, overwhelming hum in my mind softened, its purpose fulfilled for now. It changed into a new sound, a soft, gentle, almost loving lullaby soothing me as my blood dripped onto the floor. It was praising me for being a good boy. Time became a fluid, meaningless concept, measured only by the cycles of dim daylight and profound darkness filtering through the factory's grime-caked windows. The world outside ceased to exist. My world was now rust and resonance, pain and purpose. The initial agony of the first integration had subsided into a constant, dull, metallic throb in my hand. a beautiful physical reminder of my connection to the song. It was no longer just a sound in my head. It was a conversation. It whispered secrets of steel, taught me the weaknesses of my own biology, and guided my hands as I continued its holy work. The gear in my hand was just the first note. The symphony required more. Guided by the foreman's journals and the pure, unwavering instruction of the hum, I began to add more instruments to the orchestra of my body. A long, thin shard of rusted rebar was now bound so tightly to my right forearm that the skin had split, the metal slowly sinking into the muscle. I had hammered a sharpened bolt into my shoulder, the blunt trauma a percussive beat in the song of my transformation. Each new addition was an act of worship, a bloody sacrament. The pain was excruciating but temporary. It was the price of ascension. Each time after the fire of agony subsided, the song would reward me with waves of ecstatic bliss, a divine approval that made it all worthwhile. My body was becoming a testament, a living sculpture of faith. I continued to document my progress, my camera, my only confessor. The footage would be a horrifying chronicle of decay and rebirth. The infection is a purification process, I explained in one clip, my face pale and sweaty, my eyes glowing with feverish intensity. I showed the camera the angry, red and purple flesh around the rebar on my arm. The flesh is weak. It resists the change. But the song helps it understand. It's teaching my blood how to welcome the rust. In another clip, I held up a complex-looking piston I'd scavenged. This piece has a beautiful voice, a deep baritone. I think it wants to be part of my leg, to make my stride stronger, to make me walk in time with the factory's pulse. My ultimate goal, my pilgrimage, was to find the heart of the factory, the source of the song's purest resonance. The journals called it the boiler room, the womb of the Siren. It was there, Thorne had written, that he had achieved his final form. Following the intensifying vibrations, I journeyed through the factory's steel intestines, a grotesque parody of a religious pilgrim, my body, a clanking, bleeding collection of repurposed metal. I found the boiler room behind a set of colossal, circular steel doors. The hum here was so powerful it was almost a physical force, pressing in on me from all sides, making the metal in my own body vibrate with a joyful, sympathetic resonance. I heaved the doors open and stepped inside. And I saw him. The foreman, my prophet. He was sitting on a throne of welded scrap metal and pipes, a king on a throne of rust. But he was not a corpse. He was a masterpiece of biological and industrial horror. His body was almost entirely encased in a shell of bolted-on steel plates, his limbs replaced with a nightmarish assembly of pistons and gears, wires, thick as my thumb, snaked from the surrounding machinery, piercing his flesh and bolting directly to his spine. He was physically connected to the factory, a human fuse plugged into the heart of the machine. But he was silent. His jaw was gone, pried away and replaced with a complex metal grate, behind which was only darkness. He had achieved a perfect fusion, but in doing so he had destroyed the one thing the Siren truly needed: a voice. He had built a perfect orchestra with no conductor, a perfect instrument that could no longer play. He had become a monument to a failed ascension. As I stared at the foreman's silent, rusted form, the song in my head shifted. It was no longer just a hum of encouragement. It was a lesson. A wave of pure understanding washed over me, a final revelation from my god of rust and resonance. Thorne had failed because he was greedy. He tried to become the entire symphony. But the Siren didn't need another orchestra. It had the whole factory for that. It needed a soloist. It needed a singer. The foreman had destroyed his flesh to become a machine. I had to perfect my flesh to serve the machine. My purpose, my final glorious purpose, was laid bare. I wasn't meant to replace my limbs. I was meant to rebuild my larynx. I had to become the perfect vocal cord, a divine instrument to give the siren's silent vibration a true audible voice. With a newfound, terrifying clarity, I knew what I had to do. I returned to my workshop, the song in my head now a focused, instructional blueprint. I found the pieces I needed: a long, thin, sharpened bolt, a coil of fine tensile wire. This final integration would require more precision than the others. This was not brutalism. This was surgery. I set up the camera one last time, its battery light blinking a furious, dying red. I needed a witness for my ultimate act of faith. I looked into the lens, but I wasn't seeing my future audience. I was seeing my God, and this was my final prayer. I didn't speak. My old voice was obsolete. The work began. The pain was beyond anything I had experienced, a white-hot nova of agony as I performed the crude, horrifying surgery on my own throat and jaw, following the song's precise instructions. I anchored the bolt to my jawbone. I threaded the wire through my vocal cords. It was an act of creation through destruction. When it was done, I was breathless, bleeding, but reborn. The song inside me was no longer a hum. It was a coiled serpent of potential, waiting to be released. I picked up the camera. My face, reflected in the dark lens, was a monstrous canvas of my devotion. The gear was a permanent part of my hand. The rebar was a new bone in my arm. And now the gleaming head of the bolt protruded from my cheek, a new anchor point for a jaw that would no longer speak words, but sing hymns of steel. I leaned in close, until my transformed face filled the frame. I took a breath, and I opened my mouth. It was not a human sound. There was no scream, no word, no gasp for air. What emerged was a sound of pure, perfect, resonant beauty. It was a clear, melodic, metallic note, the siren song, finally given its true voice through a larynx of tortured flesh and consecrated steel. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. The camera, its battery finally exhausted, fell from my trembling, modified hand. It hit the floor with a final, percussive crack, its lens pointing up at me. The last thing it ever recorded was the image of my triumphant, grotesque form, standing tall in the heart of the factory, my body vibrating in perfect harmony. A symphony of rust and bone, singing its beautiful, terrible, and endless song into the silence.